Mm, 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 mm. All right. Uh-oh. Gaines is here. There he is. There's Kraus. Mr. Moon is here. Mr. Saunders. You want a gingerbread cookie, Mr. Saunders? You sure? Sure? I don't mind going. All right, well, it's there if you want it. There she is. Yeah, this has been acting up all day. Of course, the last day of the year, or the last class, this board has been acting up all. Been a real test. All right. No real problems the whole semester, but of course, the last day. It was really weird because that to me is more than a coincidence, Just weird. Nah, it's not. It's more than weird. Does religion have to be violent? I don't know. I'm about to be violent with this stupid. I'm a religious man, and I'm going to be violent with this stupid attraction.
Did you say religion and violence in the same sentence?
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. Ah, there you go. All right.
Who are you?
Yeah, who am I? I don't know. What Christian saint is associated with December? This period of time, this time of year. December 6th. Who am I, Ms. Colonna? Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas of Myra. Whose feast day is on Saturday, December 6th, which was actually he's very popular saint from in the ancient Christian church and even to this day. I don't know why he's so popular, but for some reason he was very popular. He was a bishop. No, he didn't die as a martyr, but he was a bishop. Anyways, and yeah, people used to give gifts on St. Nicholas's Day. That used to be the custom. Not Christmas, actually. St. Nicholas's feast day was actually celebrated with more solemnity than even Christmas. Christmas came later, hundreds of years later. They started celebrating the birthday of Jesus. So it was December 6th, which was the major feast day in December for St. Nicholas. And he still had kind of that tradition sometimes in the Germanic countries. Maybe not anymore because of our influence. Christmas is now the big holiday, but just yeah, St. Nicholas's Day, give little kids candy and presents. The Christ child usually, would leave some presents in their shoes or something. Anyway. All righty. Does religion have to be violent? Well, it's interesting because I'm talking about a guy, St. Nicholas, who was violent, actually. Was a violent man, apparently. Well, you didn't take Christian faith with me, but if you do in the fall, I know none of you are, because I've already seen the class list, so thanks a lot. That's all right. St. Nicholas was, when he was alive, yeah, he slapped another guy. He slapped a person. He's at a council, a meeting of bishops, and he heard some guy saying stuff that he thought was blasphemous, disrespectful to God. So he slapped him across the mouth. Heretic, And so, he was a saint who was acknowledged as a holy man, but they decided that, that kind of action was unbecoming of a bishop. So he wasn't allowed to wear his bishop's hat anymore. So oftentimes when you see him in pictures, he'll be without his crown or he wouldn't be wearing a mitre, but wearing like a hat, his bishop's hat. And that's usually explained because at this council, he slapped someone across the face out of anger. But if you go into any Eastern Christian church, Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, and you look up at the altar, there's a big screen of pictures, and St. Nicholas is always there. He's off to the left. You know, his picture is always there. Again, I don't know why. I don't know why he became such a huge saint, but he's always part of the pictures. Okay. Anyways. And that's how he's the one who became Santa Claus. That's, they kind of combined St. Nicholas with the holiday of Christmas and, turned him into a big fat elf who delivers presents on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. And so they can kind of combine the two ideas. So if you ever wonder why Santa Claus was dressed in red, and wore a big pointy hat, he's basically a bishop, a Catholic bishop. Okay, where are we here? Where did I stop? You see what I can do. Maybe we'll go home early today. Oops, whoops. Maybe we will. Tolerance. All right. What was I talking? Dialogue, talking. All right. I was leading up to this final point about tolerance. All right, yeah. See what I can do. And, if I finish early, which I probably will, then I'll just be class dismissed because I'm not going to keep you here just so you can listen to me blather, Tolerance. All right, comes from the Latin word tolero, to bear something, to support, to endure. I think the general mindset now is that, religion and people should coexist, but maybe religion and violence should not coexist. And if there's something that religions, apart from the question of, which I've kind of been hitting at throughout this course, about is it actually fair to link violence specifically to religion or solely to religion? Why don't we have courses on, I don't know, economics and violence, or politics and violence? Why is it like, religion and violence? That seems to be the order for the day, or at least it was in the past. Maybe it's not so much anymore, but 10 years ago, or 20 years ago after 9/11. Yeah, so regardless of who gets the blame for violence or whether religion is more violent than anything else, and, I didn't show that. I showed that in a previous PowerPoint. Maybe I'll come back to it. Nevertheless, there can be, it's still, I think, legitimate for, say, religious people to say, hey, let's nip this in the bud, yeah? I mean, I think that's possible that people could say, all right, and forget about trying to justify violence or explain it away, or to find its root causes or all this. Okay, we can do all of those things, and we can outline facts and things like most wars were not caused by religion. They're caused by other things, if we want to be technical, or the word violence itself means to profane, so it's not a sacred act to commit religious violence. In fact, it's actually the contrary to the very meaning of religion as a sign of the sacred, et cetera, and so forth. But it could still be a problem, right? And so I think it's legitimate for religious people to say, okay, if we see it could be a problem, how do we deal with it? Instead of trying to maybe explain it away, justify it, or act like it's not there, all right, is it still a possibility? And it is there. It sometimes is. What do we do? Well, dialogue is one solution. Talk to people. Talk to people, to get to know people. I guess the thinking is it's harder to kill somebody when you kind of maybe like them a little bit. It's harder for me to go out and say, kill the Muslims, let's have a crusade against Islam and kill all the Muslims and all this other stuff. When I know a few Muslims, who are nice, relatively nice people. They have families and, work jobs. They're not nameless or faceless to me anymore. When it's just an idea or some nameless or faceless like monster like Islam, or the Jews or something like that, it might be, okay, easier to kill or to talk about killing than if it's not the Jews, but it's like Shlomo who lives down the block from me, and his kids. Can I, when it now it becomes concrete, when I'm talking, if I talk about, I want to kill the Jews, or, we have to fight the Jews, all right, can I see myself going down the street and like hitting Shlomo over the head, or killing his children because they're Jews? I think that's where it might get a little bit more difficult for someone to do than if it's just like people you don't know. So dialogue can be a means for that, bridge for that, realizing, see that, you're not dealing with, a monster, or you're not dealing with this construct that you've been told to hate. You're dealing with actual people. All right, so dialogue, talking to people. But as I said, I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think, eventually, I think it shouldn't be a pointless dialogue, because for me, that's circular. You end up in the same place. Remember justice. Justice is like, I did nothing. Did nothing. Nothing. There you go. What? Ah! All right. Huh? 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 All right. This will do something. It does nothing. Start it up again. Okay. Talk about justice. You want to feel that your needs are met. Okay. So if we have dialogue and we're talking, but okay, so maybe you start feeling your needs are met, but if the dialogue is, when you feel it's pointless at a certain time, it's like, okay, you talk this to death. You like this class. It's been 3 months. We've talked the issue to death. You know what our position is. We know what your position is. Now, the next step is, what are we going to do about it, right? So I don't think dialogue can be endless. It's not a panacea. It's not a fix-all. Because you can end up right at the same problem of people don't feel that they've been listened to. Their needs are not being met because all you're going to do is talk to me about, this, that, and the other, but you're not going to do anything to change you, and I'm not going to do anything to change me. Okay? What's the word for that? I should have thought of a word for that, for the next stage after dialogue. I guess action, but I mean, that's too simple. I got a PhD. I got to think of something fancy. Praxis, maybe. Praxis. Ooh, that sounds good. You education people, you know all about the praxis, right? The praxis test and okay. Practice, Yeah, where's the rubber hit the road? Where's it become practical? What are we going to do? Okay, to, if we see violence or whatever. And I'm not sure if you read the statement by the Pope with one of the Muslim leaders, just to give you some background on that statement, Pope Francis, who's now dead, may he rest in peace. Hopefully you read this already. The document on human brotherhood for world peace and living together. Okay, and the Pope traveled over to Abu Dhabi, which is in the United Arab Emirates, which is a group of emirs. An emir is, I don't know, what would be the equivalent? They're not really kings. They're more like princes, I think. So it's like a union of principalities. There are different emirs in the area. They've all united to form a common nation. I'd have to look on the internet to see how they organize their government, but they're not really a democracy per se, but they're an emirate. Okay, so they're ruled by these emirs who are kind of like princes, like royalty in a way, aristocrats. And they're a group of them that have come together. They're a federation into what's called the UAE, or the United Arab Emirates. Anyways, the Pope went there for a meeting and he signed a statement with this dude, Ahmed El-Tayeb. I don't think I put it on the PowerPoint. I'll write it on the board. Where is this one? No. Ahmed El-Tayeb. Oh, you gotta be kidding. What was that? Ahmed El-Tayeb, who apparently is, rather well known in the Islamic world. He's the Grand Imam. An Imam, if you take world religions with me in next semester, you'll learn what an Imam is. But basically, Imam is a leader of prayer in the mosque, okay? Who could be anybody, but now the term has come to be used for more specialized people who are, leaders or teachers in the Muslim community. So he's the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. What is that? Al-Azhar Al-Sharif. We should put that on a PowerPoint. Al-Azhar. Did I say Al-Sharif? You sure I get it right? Al-Sharif. Which is in Egypt. So he's from Egypt, actually, not from the UAE. So Al-Azhar Al-Sharif is an institution of learning. It's the name for an institution of learning. Basically, it's what we would call a think tank. Okay, it's a think tank because it includes all sorts of scientific institutions and religious institutions that are. It's Muslim oriented. It's kind of a religious think tank in that sense. You could also look at it as a university. I think it does have actually a university, Al-Azhar University, and it's considered one of the most prominent or prestigious Islamic universities in the world. It also has a huge famous mosque. Okay. So he's an important guy. I'm trying to think what the equivalent might be. I don't know that we have the equivalent in importance. Could say like, I don't know, the president of Harvard University, one of our oldest institutions, but that kind of doesn't do it justice because he's more than that. But anyway, so he's a voice to be listened to in the Islamic world. And I guess that's why the Pope met with him, because the Pope is kind of like the voice to be listened to in the Christian world. Even if you're not a Christian, people usually will show up to hear the Pope, even if they're not Catholic. And so they met to address this issue of living together, world peace and living together in their statement. And so in the document, if you read the document, it's addressed to intellectuals, artists, religious figures, all sorts of people to rediscover the values of peace, justice, goodness, beauty, human fraternity, brotherhood, and sisterhood, I would imagine. But these are two men, Ms. Colonna, so gotta cut them some slack, And coexistence, living together. Okay, where the idea of toleration comes in. I'll get to in a moment. All right. So, I read the document. Hello, sir. I listened to it. I don't think I actually read it. Or did I actually read it? I didn't listen to it on the radio in the car. So maybe I did actually read it. I'm going to say it's not the most interesting document in the world that I've ever read. Not something I would necessarily want to read again, Ms. Horan. And I probably would not have read it if not for the course, to be honest with you. And if you read it, it's not really religious. Does it even mention God? I think I might mention God once or twice. I don't think it, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember correctly. It's very, very sparse on the religious aspects. It's making more of I think, a philosophical argument for being committed to peace and whatever. That I think could be dangerous because if you have two religious figures meeting, Ms. Cook, right? How's it going, Ms. Cook? Long day? Cold? Really? A final this morning? Before finals week? be mine. What's that all about?
Super.
Ooh, that's interesting. Well, actually, no, it sounds like one. Yeah. Then again, my class bores me to death. Thank you, Mr. Clutcher. Sure. No, I think maybe that's dangerous though, because if the whole thing, the problem, or you're seeing the problem is religion and violence, and then you kind of avoid the whole idea of religion. It seems like, reading between the lines, you're saying like religion has no answer to violence other than just, well, I guess religious people have to decide that they won't let religion be violent against. But it begs the question, does that mean then religion is the problem, part of the problem? Oh, just things I'm thinking about, What's the solution that religion can give to violence? Are there any solutions? Do you think? Religion have any means of mitigating violence? Yes? No? Waiting me out? Waiting me out? So what do you think the point of the statement was? I mean, the Pope in the statement, he doesn't invoke his own authority as a leader of Christianity, does he? He doesn't say, by my authority as the Pope, as, the earthly head of the Catholic Church, I say, Ahmed al-Tayeb, he doesn't say, as Grand Imam, a voice who can speak for all Muslims. Actually, he can't really, but because there is no equivalent to the Pope in Islam, so really is no voice that can speak for every Muslim. But nevertheless, as Grand Imam, whatever that's worth, I say in the name of God, in the words of the Quran, no violence. Will they do that in the document? Hey. I got it. Got it, Mr. Moon. Going back?
Okay, answer your question.
Nothing. Okay. All right. Nothing. No, you don't have to answer my question. Okay. That's going to happen. What do you think, Mr. Dobson? Do you think that's kind of a cop-out? Like you got these two religious leaders come together and they don't even address the elephant in the room of, hey, our religions might have an answer to violence. They just rely on philosophical ideas. What do you think?
Less than some chance. Like, there won't be as much conflict if you popular.
Like maybe they were avoiding it? Or? And why the Pope and this guy, this Grand Imam? Why not the Pope and, I don't know, Dalai Lama, bring in the Dalai Lama, I don't know, I don't think there's really one voice for Hinduism. The Hindu people, no equivalent really. Which is interesting, because then that kind of shows the fracturedness of religion. Who can speak for whom? Who's the Pope of the Hindus, in a manner of speaking? Who's the Pope of Voodoo? Who's the Pope of native religions? Who can speak for all these people? Right? So who can say who has the authentic religion is not, right? Hmm. Maybe it's a flawed statement. I don't know. I'm just spitballing sometimes. Got to fill time. You still have got you something. What's practice? Well, probably the best that we can come up with, I think they can come up with, is tolerance. We endure each other. If you want to look at it from the negative perspective, it's endurance. We endure each other. We know we're not going to agree, and so we just accept that we're not going to ever agree on something. But we accept that also we're not going to physically violate each other because we don't agree. All right. Not sure how that always works either, because if you're disagreeing, because it's like agreeing to disagree. All right. Problem again, it sounds great, like we'll tolerate each other, we'll be tolerant, we'll coexist, like those bumper stickers show. Coexist. What if the situation is such you cannot coexist? You feel like you cannot coexist. Think about our own American situation. Not now, but 50, 60 years ago, right? When I was talking about segregation, right? The last class I was talking about segregation and, Jim Crow, and, even in the North, there were places a black person couldn't go or wouldn't be welcome. And so it wasn't just like a Mississippi thing, it was a Maine thing too. You might go to a diner in Maine and still not be served if you have the wrong skin color or something, or you look the wrong way. Just as much as if you went down to Mississippi. I don't think people in the North necessarily wanted, let's say, people of color in the schools with their children any less than, say, in Mississippi than they want, or Alabama, just it was more open. It was clear down in Alabama or Mississippi or in any place that there were the Jim Crow, what they're called the Jim Crow laws or the segregation laws. It was clear that, you were separate. Okay, you had equal services, but the races were to be kept separate. Whereas in the North, the laws weren't there. But, was there really much of a difference? Could you find a difference at the public school? Well, maybe in the public schools. I don't know. I didn't live back then, and I'm not an African American, so I never had that experience. I would never have that experience. But it'll be interesting to find out, I think. Ask somebody who lived back then. Okay, so toleration. You can say, well, okay, we'll coexist, right? We'll coexist. The whites will live in this neighborhood. Blacks will live in that neighborhood. The whites will have their supermarkets and Walmarts and whatnot. And the blacks will have theirs. And we'll coexist, right? Because we have to agree to disagree. Some of us just, if people can't, agree on certain basic things, rights, say, even the humanity of a group of people, or simply even living together, just simply do not want this group living in my neighborhood with my children at my school. Okay. It's a non-negotiable for me. And we can talk about it all we want. It's finally like a non-negotiable. What are you going to do about it? Okay, tolerance. Coexist. We'll endure. Can that work, though? Sometimes. Can coexistence solve the problem when it's unendurable? I don't know. Or you have to fight back. Because the situation simply be wrong. Say, no, I won't tolerate this. It's just a wrong situation. It can't be endured. It has to change. All right. But then the question, how do you actively change it? How, without leading to violence. Without leading to violence. That's a tough one. What do you think? Maybe? Huh? What? Okay. What if at the end of the day my response is still, I'm not ever going to agree to X. I don't want this forced upon me, whatever X is. Well, then what do you do? What do you do with me? Oh, the scapegoat. Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Well, you could, I was thinking you'd go like, tolerate me, you just have to put up with me, right? You could. And maybe, I guess, for little things or what we consider maybe minor things, I guess you could tolerate. We do this all the time especially with religious questions in this country, what type of people could work at a Catholic institution, for example, or not just a Catholic institution, but I'm assuming that a Jewish organization would not hire someone who denied the Holocaust, said it never happened or something, or had pictures of Adolf Hitler or Hermann Goebbels, on his Facebook page. They'd probably say, okay, go work somewhere else. You don't have to work here. With private entities, you have that that you can be intolerant. Okay. You allow for that. All right. But when it comes to other questions like who is a human being? Who is a human being? And what can you do to them? Can you own them like property? Can you kill them at will? Okay, that's a question. And people have had those questions sometimes. Some people say, yeah, you can own human beings, other human beings. And yeah, you can kill human beings just because they exist. They're inconvenient, unwanted. Is that a tolerable situation? All right, fine. I'm just, trying to maybe push beyond the little bumper sticker philosophy, which just says, coexist and stuff. Okay, great, coexist. But how do you coexist if you feel that, you're being exploited or oppressed? You say, well, that's what they think about us. So, they stick us in ghettos. Right? So we just live your life, coexist. You're not going to change things. You're not going to change the way they think. All right. Just throwing it out there. Because what if the beliefs are wrong? I mean, dialogue, this is another problem, a criticism I have of dialogue, is that it can sometimes assume that the people dialoguing and what they're talking about, they might be, seeking truth together, but sometimes don't you have to point out that some beliefs are wrong? They just are wrong. And where do you go from there? Are there some beliefs that are simply wrong? So you could tolerate the difference. For example, I don't believe that Muhammad was a true prophet of God. We're talking about Muhammad and world religions and Islam. I think he was a nice guy. I think he was a good guy. I mean, I don't hate him or, think anything bad about him. I didn't know the man, but from what I've read about him, he seemed like a sincere man. But I don't believe he received a true prophecy or vision from God. So that's why I don't follow him. All right. But I do sympathize and respect the Muslims that do. And I try to understand, or I do understand, why their belief in Muhammad as a true prophet of God causes them to do certain things. Maybe so, okay. So I guess tolerance can go that way. I can tolerate the difference. I don't agree with it. I don't believe in it, but I understand why they do it. You know? But I don't have to defend it either. But I can at least understand why they do it. Or I could tolerate a disagreement to avoid a greater disagreement. Proportionality here. For example, I think that, like when I'm driving home in New Jersey, there's a huge Hindu temple I pass by. Built this big, huge Hindu temple complex along the way. Okay? Now, from my perspective as a Christian believer, I think that's idolatrous because people, they go there to worship statues. They believe that the gods inhabit the statue. The statue kind of becomes alive with the presence of the god. And so they give them food and they wash them and bathe them like if they're really alive and stuff like that. Okay, fine. They pray to them, directly to them, not just through them to the god, but they think the god's in there. I think that's idolatry. That's my personal belief. But, if I were like a councilman or something, or, or if I had power, would I say, okay, we got to shut down all these temples? They can't be there anymore. You have to close the doors and lock them because people are doing what I think is the wrong thing. Well, that might cause unrest, violent unrest and opposition from the Hindu community. But I would still be believing I'm doing the right thing. But my belief might lead to bad consequences. So I can tolerate it. That's not a question really here in our country, but say if we were a religious state, like a country where Christianity was the official state religion, yeah, that's a question. Do you close all the Hindu temples or mosques, or do you let them function even though they're not Christian, or teaching things that Christianity doesn't believe in, or doing practices that Christians don't believe in? Because, say, the state church is the Lutheran Church, like, say, in Sweden, or the Church of England, like in the United Kingdom. Okay, we don't have that problem here because the government doesn't go either way with religion. It doesn't promote it, but it doesn't oppose it either. At least it's not supposed to. Each religious belief a person is left to his own. But are there limits to tolerance? That's what I'm saying. If something is completely wrong, especially on an issue that matters, would you try to convince that person otherwise? Like if there were something that was of value to me, like, for example, educating women, allowing girls to go to school. That's not a question here in this country, obviously. Right, Ms. Cook, yeah. Ms. Rogers, obviously. Maybe culturally it was, maybe I don't know, century ago, whatever, I don't think it was that common for women to be in schools. That wasn't seen as their role. But then it wasn't common for a lot of people to be in schools, even guys. But there are some places in the world where, for example, the classic example is Afghanistan, where the group that's in charge, according to their version, their reading of Islamic teaching, that's not the role of a woman. Her place is with a family, creating the family, governing the family. That's her sphere of influence. There's no need to be educated. And even if you want, into some cases, even men don't need to be educated. They just need to know the Quran, be educated in the Quran and stuff like that. But certainly not women. So to open schools for girls is kind of, subversive activity. It's not something, and they closed them down in Afghanistan. They were there when we were kind of there. Our soldiers were there, but after the Taliban kind of whipped us and kicked us out. We kind of ran away. Taliban are in control, and they've slowly just closed down all the schools that were for girls, which is their belief. Okay, I understand it. I understand their belief. I don't like it or agree with it, but I try to undermine it. Should I undermine it, or should I coexist with it and tolerate it? Or is it such a value that I should actually raise my voice and say, no, you're wrong on this? So those are, I think, the limits. I'm just pointing out some of the limits of tolerance and coexistence. It's not as easy as, a meme on the internet. And it's not, I don't think it's as easy, I'm not trying to be overly critical of the Pope and the Imam, but I don't think it's as easy as just putting out a statement, calling people to value peace and stuff like, yeah, that's great. Who doesn't value peace, right? It's like, someone says, do you want French fries with that? Of course, I want French fries. Come on. Well, maybe not. Like, you have to ask. No. But it avoids the pricklier question of, what if you are in a society that, on fundamental issues, where do you draw those lines? What are the fundamental issues that you're going to have to say, okay, we can coexist up to this point. After this point, we can't. We have to resist, right? So then we go to resistance. Where do we resist? All right. Food for thought, I guess. I'm throwing these things out here, seeing what sticks, what floats, what flies, what falls. Thoughts I had with the document. What solution does it propose? It doesn't seem to propose one, really. But time. Half an hour early? That's too early. Nah, maybe. Let's see. Do I got anything else in my notes? No. All right, fine. I'm not going to keep you here for half an hour just blathering at you. God bless you all. It's been my pleasure to teach you, have taught you. Hope you do well in the final exam and enjoy yourselves. See you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, miss. Have a good day. Good holiday. Whatever you're celebrating.
How you doing, girl?
You're welcome, sir. Good day, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir. You too, sir. Good day. Have a good holiday. Well, that's nice.